Welcome back to Musical Moods, or if you're new, welcome. Today we're covering the major 9 chord. Let's begin. The major 9 is constructed by stacking 2 pairs of major and minor thirds. From the root, there's a major third, perfect fifth, major 7th, and major 9. Or a major 7th chord with an added major 9th. With that in mind, there's other ways to break down this chord. For one, we could see it as 3 stacked triads: D major, F sharp minor, and A major. Or as a combination of 2 7th chords, D major 7 and F sharp minor 7. Using a more nuts and bolts perspective, we'll notice that the major 9 pairs 3 sets of perfect fifths that are either a major or minor third apart. Noting these traits will help later on when we dive into voicing techniques. But what do these traits say about the chord's overall sound quality? Well, the primary sound colors, the major 3rd and 7th, create a bright, relaxed tone, while the secondary sound color, the major 9th, adds more richness, while still blending well with the other tones, as it follows a consistent pattern of stacked thirds. As a result, we're left with a complex, yet highly stable sound that feels bright, smooth, soothing, and serene. So, in creative terms, what can we actually do with this sound? We'll cover this in 2 stages. Number 1, voicing ideas, and number 2, melodic ideas. And please, feel free to share your own ideas in the comments. To create different voicings, let's begin with inversions shaped by octave displacement. You can map out some options by starting in root position, where D is the lowest pitch. Feel free to label the formula of the voicing for transpositions. From here, we'll take the highest note, E, and move it down 1 octave. Now, C sharp is our highest pitch. For another voicing, we can move C sharp down an octave. If we continue this process, we'll make 6 unique voicings. Of these 6 voicings, only root position is spread. The rest are closed, since their pitch range span less than 1 octave. With 5 pitches, all of these voicings will feel lush and compressed, but if we look closely at the 3rd and 4th options, we'll see a cluster of 4 adjacent pitches, either a half step or whole step apart. These 2 are great options if you want an especially rich and colorful sound. Keep in mind, this is just one method of octave displacement. You can, of course, displace or double any of the pitches by 1 or more octave. This is useful if you want a more wide or expansive sound that uses a large pitch range. Let's say you want to sketch some harmonies for your next project. You could start in root position and apply this displacement process to as many pitches as you'd like. Try setting some parameters and see where they lead you. For example, you can displace 1 pitch by 1 octave, or 2 pitches by 2 octaves, or you could displace 1 pitch by 1 octave and another by 2 octaves. Save the sketches and keep a list of your favorite voicings. You could refer back to this list later if you ever want to transpose these voicings for a different project. Next, we'll cover rootless voicings. This approach is useful if your instruments are limited in their ability to play simultaneous pitches. It can also help maintain the major 9's most harmonically important pitches while avoiding the more cluttered voicings we've built using octave displacement. Let's say you want that major 9 sound, but for whatever reason you're not able to use all 5 pitches. In many cases, your best bet would be to go with the 3rd, 7th, and 9th. The 3rd and 7th are primary sound colors that define the chord quality, while the 9th is the secondary sound color indicating which added color tone is being used. As a starting point, you can use F sharp minor 7 as a rootless voicing for D major 9. Then you can complete the chord by placing the root in another instrument. Let's take bass and vibraphone, for example. Here, the vibraphone plays a rootless voicing, while the bass completes the chord by sounding the root. Now, let's hear a more musical example in the context of a 2-5-1 progression. Of course, the vibes can complete the harmony alone using a broken chord pattern, so a rootless voicing is only necessary if you specifically want a block chord. Inversely, you can complete the chord by placing a rootless voicing underneath a melody that includes pitches missing from your harmony. Here's an example. Below, the strings play the 3rd, 7th, and 9th, while the flute melody fills in the rest. For our next few ideas, we'll explore voicings that emphasize stacked fourths and fifths. As mentioned earlier, the major 9 includes 3 perfect fifths, each of which invert to a fourth. So, we can build voicings that contain stacks of fourths and fifths. Here we have D, A, and E, the root, 5th, and 9th of the chord. Above this, we'll complete the harmony by placing the 3rd, F sharp, and 7th, C sharp above. For stacked fourths, we can place the 9th, E in the bottom, and stack the 5th, A, and root, D above it. It's a similar effect to the fifths, but with a subtle feeling of suspense. For more ideas, let's try flipping the structure of these voicings. For instance, our original voicing began with stacked fifths and placed a 3rd and 7th above. In the flipped version, we'll lead with the 3rd and 7th and stack the fifths on top instead. The minor 9th between C sharp and D adds a nice touch of tension to the sound. This could be useful if you want a more tense feeling while maintaining the same pitches. Here, we basically have the same voicing, but with C sharp in the bottom. Lastly, we'll take our example using stacked fourths and flip its presentation. Here we have our 3rd and 7th with stacked fourths above, and here it is with C sharp in the bass. So, now that we've covered some voicing techniques, let's discuss melody using scales or modes. For D major 9, we can of course use the D major scale. So, let's address this first, then we'll discuss other modes. If your melody stays within this scale, it will reasonably fit well with D major 9. However, here's 3 general points to consider. Number 1, if you want a clearly defined tonal center, start and end your melodic phrase on the root. You can also use a pickup measure or beat for more tonal emphasis. Typically, this involves placing the 5th scale degree on a weak beat before landing on the tonic in the following strong beat. Number 2, emphasize the characteristic tones of the chord or scale. Again, this brings us to our primary and secondary sound colors. They're the characteristic tones that will best represent the feeling of this harmony. Here, the melody includes every chord tone, but mostly leans into the 9th to suggest that major 9 sound. Number 3, use mode-specific harmonies or pedal tones. In this case, we're using the Ionian mode, so you can stick with the major 9. Just be sure the root is clearly emphasized if you want a clear tonal center. If your voicing is rootless, include the root in the melody. If it's not in the melody, make sure it's in the voicing. Or for maximum clarity, use it in both, as I did here. Your melody can, of course, include non-chord tones, but again, if you want a clear major 9 sound, treat these pitches as passing tones, or avoid sustaining them for long periods of time, and also avoid placing them on strong beats like 1 or 3. This is especially the case for the 4th scale degree G. It's a half step away from the 3rd of the chord, so in many cases you could end up with a minor 9th between the harmony and melody, and you may find this jarring or unexpected. If that's the case, you can use it as a brief passing tone, or you can simply raise it by a half step. This avoids clashing with F sharp. However, it may give your passage a D Lydian sound, so if that's not what you want, stick with G natural as a brief passing tone, or avoid it altogether as is the case with my example. Lastly, let's talk modes. We know the D major scale fits nicely with D major 9, but since all of its modes contain the same pitches, how do we shape a melody to reflect the unique sound of a specific mode? To answer that, we'll again refer to the 3 points we discussed earlier, only this time we'll apply them to another mode. Number 1. Define your tonal center by starting and ending phrases with the modal tonic pitch. In the context of the D major scale, we would use E for Dorian, F sharp for Phrygian, G for Lydian, and so on. Number 2. Include the mode's characteristic tones. For Dorian, the natural 6th is a rather prominent feature, so be sure to include it. For Lydian, be sure to include the raised 4th, and for Mixolydian, lean into the flat 7th. Number 3. Use mode-specific harmonies or pedal tones on the modal root to reinforce its identity. For a pedal tone, use the root of your desired mode and sustain it underneath your melody. For a fuller harmony, use a chord scale approach by building a 7th chord on the mode's root. Let's take E Dorian, for example. If we build a 7th chord on its root, we get E minor 7. Therefore, E Dorian can be thought of as the parent scale of this chord, so it can support an E Dorian melody. This example here is in E Dorian, and it follows the 3 general methods we discussed. So, although we've been focusing on the major 9, you'll pretty much need to use other chords within this scale to support a mode that isn't D Ionian. However, if you're looking for more exotic sounds, feel free to superimpose any of the modes over the major 9 harmony. Of course, you can use any mode of D major, or you could try modes from a closely related scale like A major. This stems from the common practice of raising the 4th degree in D major to avoid the minor 9s between F sharp and G. In a sense, this method borrows a note from A major, so why not explore its other modes as well? For my next example, I'll superimpose a B Dorian melody over D major 9. B Dorian is the 2nd mode of A major. To wrap things up, I'll present a short excerpt that employs some of the techniques we've discussed. Now that we've had a listen, let's break it down. Overall, this excerpt features 3 distinct sections: an A section, a B section, and a transition that helps us get back into the A section. The first section is constructed only using the pitches from the D major 9. The second section is in B Dorian, which borrows G sharp from the A major scale. In every section, the strings maintain a 16th note rhythmic scheme. Let's look closely at the 5th measure of section A. Between all of the string instruments, we have this composite voicing. This is what I started with before turning it into this. This whole voicing was made by messing around with octave displacement and pitch doubling. I placed D and A in the bass for stability. For richness in the mid-range, I used a cluster between the root, 9th, and 3rd. For extra color in the upper mid-range, I placed the 7th just below the root. The rest is stacked 5ths from D. Let's have a listen. Just above this, the winds play a short descending figure. This phrase breaks the major 9 into the 3 distinct triads that we mentioned at the start of the video. For me, this was an attempt to create some sense of harmonic motion without using other pitches. Next, the woodwinds fade out, while the timpani and contrabass respond. Here, they reach a dynamic peak right when the woodwinds are at their lowest dynamic level. So far, this section feels like it's developing slowly, so my idea was to gradually bring attention to timpani and bass while the winds gradually take a back seat. Next, the trombones respond with the same pattern that the woodwinds played, only it's down an octave. At this point, all of the instruments are following the same dynamic scheme. They're either decreasing in volume, or have already dropped out completely. This is to make room for the last measure of A. Here, most of the strings grow softer, while percussion and bass carry us into the B section. Now we have our first real chord change to B minor. To reinforce this, I place a forceful B minor triad in the trombones right when percussion has a dramatic impact. I went to B minor because I was aiming for this passage to sound like B Dorian. If we're thinking in the context of D major, then you could say that I went to the relative minor, only in this case it's a different flavor of minor. To reinforce the Dorian sound further, I made sure to include G sharp in the flute melody. This is the raised 6th degree that is often highly suggestive of that Dorian sound. The chord progression that supports the flute alternates between B minor and E major. This is a minor 1 to major 4 progression that also highly suggests Dorian. The E major chord that appears frequently in this passage also contains the raised 6th, which makes up for the fact that it only appears once in the flute melody. Speaking of, let's look more closely at the flute melody. In general, I was making sure to land on the appropriate chord tones whenever the harmony changes. Whenever the strings play B minor, I usually have the flute play B, C sharp, and D. This is the minor trichord that comes from the first 3 notes of the B Dorian scale, so it'll usually fit well. Whenever the strings play E major, I make sure that the melody includes its chord tones. Here, the melody lands on E, which is the root, and then immediately jumps down to B, which is the 5th of E major. Then the next time we see E major, the melody lands on G sharp, which is the 3rd, immediately has a passing tone, and then finally sits on B, which is the 5th. Next, I wanted to cover this counter melody in bass clarinet. In general, I'm applying the same thought process as I did to the flute, but I'm also trying to create at least a little bit of contrary motion between the parts. For example, in the second measure of B, the flute melody has an upward contour from C sharp to E, while the bass clarinet moves downward from B to G sharp. In the fourth measure, we have a brief moment of contrary motion. Here, the flute melody moves downward from D to B, while the clarinet moves upward from E to F sharp. Let's listen to these 2 parts without accompaniment. So next, percussion carries us into the transition, and we start to see the reappearance of D major. Meanwhile, flute starts with C sharp and F sharp. Again, these are the primary sound colors of D major 9, so this will help solidify the chord change. Then, at the end of the transition, we get a bit of a break by thinning out the texture, leaving only the cellos and violas to continue their 16th note pattern. At this point in the transition, we have fully returned to the tonal area of D major, which allows us to gently ease back into the A section. Let's have a listen. So that's it for this episode. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. Let me know down below if you'd like the series to continue, or let me know if you'd like me to cover other topics in a similar format.